Having to deal with the Man of Steel, who wants to enforce martial law. Here's your look at McFarlane Toys' DC Multiverse, Batman Beyond vs. Justice Lord Superman. The Justice Lords hail from an alternate universe where the Justice League decided to enforce the law and order through any means necessary. Years ago, the Justice League defeated them, and Wonder Woman returned to their world with them to make sure they stayed in check. But something went wrong. Now Wonder Woman is back in the world of Batman Beyond, and Superman and Bruce Wayne sense she's hiding something. As Terry McGinnis takes a dangerous trip to the Justice Lord's world to find out Wonder Woman's secrets, and encounters a version of himself whose life took a very different path, the Justice Lords return to our Earth in search of Wonder Woman. Just before we look at a power-corrupted Clark and a slightly troubled Terry, grabbing the tape measure to see how tall the figures stand. These are going to be reused molds from ones we've gotten before, and I'm going to bring a couple of comparisons so you'll see in a second. Though Justice Lord's Superman stands about 6 3/4 of an inch in height, or the figure is going to be about 16.5 centimeters tall. Terry, though, is slightly taller, only by the points on the top of his cowl. The figure is almost about 7 inches in height, or about 17 centimeters tall. For those that have been collecting DC Multiverse for a while may recognize this mold for Supes, as it's the same one that we got with both Hush Superman and several other iterations as well. If you want the closest mold, though, the figure is actually mirroring that of Eradicator. But also as well, I can bring in another Superman. This happened to be the Superman that got paired along with the destructive Doomsday. As for Terry McGinnis, he's gotten several releases on his own. Obviously, there was the original one. This was the one that had the visible mouth. There was also a variant of that one that had the closed visored mouth. I still prefer the OG in the middle. We also did get ourselves an ink version of Terry McGinnis, which really wasn't ink. I mean, let's face facts. It was simply just a recolored version of Batman Beyond. And we also got ourselves a battle-damaged Batman Beyond, but all still essentially using the same mold. More times than not, when it comes to these two-pack releases, Todd McFarlane and his team throw in some extra bells and whistles, that being a very decorative display stand. And Justice Lord Superman and Terry McGinnis Batman Beyond does come included with a very decorative-looking display stand, molded in sort of more of a rusted red-brown. On the top, though, you've got all these. Now, would these be stalagmites or stalactites? One come from the bottom, one jet down from the top. I think these are stalagmites. Either way, though, you've got a higher peaks on the one side, slightly smaller peaks as you get to the other end here. And then along the middle here, you get all this nice additional decorative silver that's been painted on top of the rock facing. There's a peg right here. And if further down, you can also see there's a peg right there you can plug in. I always find the problem with these display stands, though, is the fact that they always seem really close in quarters. So if you take your Superman, and then you attach Terry McGinnis right here, it's really close in contact where you have the two figures. I wish they kind of had maybe the pegs even further over, allowing for some necessary space in the middle. If you did, though, want to, again, you just take your Superman, plug it in place. You take your Terry McGinnis, plug it in place. I'll bring it back, I'm sure, in final looks, so you guys can kind of see what they look like on their display stand. Very noticeable viewers will also notice the fact that there's a groove, a canal on the back here, because also coming included with this, you get yourself a backdrop standee. The standee seems to have the inside or interior of the Batcave. I like the look of this because, first of all, there's not a lot of colors here competing with the colors of the actual figures. I think it's also just something that brings a little bit more pizzazz when it comes to displaying these guys on your shelf. On the other hand, though, or on the other side, you get yourself a two-panel layout. One side actually does feature Justice Lord Superman. The other side, though, doesn't have this version of Batman Beyond Terry McGinnis, but rather instead it seems to be the OG. It's kind of strange, really, to have this as be something that's displayed behind the figures. Obviously, you're going to want to flip the order of these around, so Justice Lord Superman would be on one side, Terry McGinnis then would be on the other side. I think it's a bit silly, honestly, to have the figures displayed in front of pictures of them. It's kind of like, I think, Milhouse walking around with a Radioactive Man shirt that had a picture of Radioactive Man. I think even Lisa had said, I think if you were supposed to be Radioactive Man, you wouldn't be walking around with a shirt that had your picture on it. So I think what I might end up doing instead, is take this as being the part that's going to be the focal point. I guess these would be the focal point. These would be the background. Just a case of those sliding it into the groove, and then you're just going to have this display behind the figures. I'm going to carefully not to knock the figures off. There we go, slide it behind them. And really, you don't even have to have the figures attached onto the pegs, because really when you already have the backdrop already slid in place, again, it cuts the quarters for the figures to stand that much smaller. If instead, rather, you'd like to have the figures displayed just with their own unique stands, well, the figures also come included with, maybe not necessarily unique, but they all come with their own dedicated stands. Little two black circular stands we always tend to see when it comes to these DC Multiverse reviews. You get a DC logo printed down below here. I mean, they are identical. Well, they're different, obviously, in the sense that it's not the same stand, but again, they're identical in the way that they appear. Move those to the side. The figures also come included with trading cards. Now, if you really like that back image that we looked at earlier, then you'll love the fact that the trading cards are exactly the same image. You get one for a very imposing Man of Steel. Of course, look at Justice Lord Superman. I love the look of this. I would love to get this, speaking of Radioactive Man, on a t-shirt. How cool would that be to have this version of Superman printed on the front of a t-shirt? And then, of course, you also get yourself the regular version of Batman Beyond. Strange, again, that they chose this version of Batman Beyond. And even if you look to the back as well, the real name is Terrence Terry McGinnis. And then the paragraph read, there's no real mention at all that this is a troubled Terry. It's basically just a basic generic read-up of Terry McGinnis. Now, you can, again, pause this and read for yourself. I ended up reading the Justice Lord Superman because I think it had a little more to do with the actual figures. If I read this one, I mean, basically would only make mention of Batman Beyond. So we're going to move those cards to the side. And then, of course, you can also get yourself some extra accessories. Superman, for example, and considering that these are reused molds, I can't imagine that they're coming up with brand new unique hands, for example, for Superman. He has mauling hands, best way I could describe it. As it is right now, he has closed fists on the ends of his forearms. But if you want to get something a little bit more creative, then he also comes with these hands too. The hands themselves, just picking up the figure, is just a case of easily removing the hands from the pegs on both sides. What I end up doing, somebody had asked me what I do with my extra accessories when I'm not displaying them. I tend to put them in a little baggie, and sometimes if I have the time, which isn't, I never really have time, but if I have the time, I'll get a little label maker and I'll print off exactly what the accessories are inside. That's a lot of extra work. What I usually just end up doing a lot of times, just because I don't have the time, is I just write it on with a marker, and I just put, like, for example, so this set, I'll write Justice Lord's Superman, and I'll also put Terry McGinnis. Although really, if you're going to be putting them inside of a Ziploc bag, you'll really know by the fact you'll be able to see straight through it what exactly the figure is and what accessories those figures have. Anyways, while I have been talking this whole time, I've given myself the mauling hands for Justice Lord Superman. It does bring a little bit more, certainly when it comes to displaying the figure. I mean, I don't tend to really ever display my figures with closed fists because I find it's always the least interesting pair of hands when it comes to any of these figures, unless really you want to have them in a punching pose. I'd much rather have Superman looking like he's going to squish your head like a melon. Definitely looks good with this particular figure. Speaking of this particular figure, this version, again, of Superman is really just, again, using the same mold as the Eradicator, right down to the exact same cape. That flowing off side cape, if you really liked it with Eradicator, you'll be happy to see it now with Justice Lord Superman. If you hated that cape and the way it flows off to the side, you may not like it anymore by the fact that they decided to use it for this Superman suit. Let's just hold on for a second. I'm going to move this out of the way because I don't want this to be a distraction, especially if the camera's focusing on that instead of the figure. All right, with that out of the way, head sculpt wise, I think it's a really good likeness to a more slightly older looking Superman. He has now gray there on the sides and the back of his head. He also has heat rayed vision burns all around his eyes. Looks like he's about to actually start to blast away somebody with his heat ray vision. It's a good looking head sculpt. My only real problem with it stems more from the fact that they decided to use this particular body. The problem with this body is the fact that proportionally he looks good, like, from the waist up. I think he's equally sized. I may say, like, if anything, his head sculpt might be a tad too big for this particular frame. Because, I mean, if you look at his head, it looks quite large against the shoulders and against the rest of his body. But it looks even larger when you look at the squatter legs that he has for this particular build. I don't really like this body as much just because, again, like, when you're looking at Superman, it really does seem like his legs are way too short for the rest of the proportions of his body. This, from, like, if I was to put my hand in front of it, this whole part upward doesn't look that bad at all. But, like, looking at short and stumpy little legs does lose a little of the effect of what Superman should really look like. Also, because they're, of course, using the same mold. The Superman shield, for example, will be exactly the same. And usually one of the things with Justice Lord Superman that companies really always have a hard time to do is mimicking the look of having the symbol go essentially right into the cape. I mean, you can really see that there's a section where the cape is part still of the shield, but it doesn't really look like the shield should have been higher than what this is right now. So it looked like it would be a little more of a seamless transition from the shield, the Superman S, all the way right into the shield, right into the cape. I mean, it's decent enough and it looks well enough like Superman. But again, if you look at the card, for example, that shield goes right into the cape. It's essentially one piece. The head sculpt, again, I do really like. It's one of the better looking angrier Supermans that we've gotten. But again, I just feel like maybe the head is a little too big for the rest of the figure's body. He does have some additional striping now there on the sleeves. The sleeves themselves, this part here is actually raised, whereas this part at the back is actually just printed in place. Now, unfortunately, though, also by using the same mold, you can kind of see that they've essentially painted over some of the features from an earlier figure. Not as much maybe in the belt, because that's, again, just painted in place. But you see it even more so when you're looking at the figure's boots. Striping over top of basically the existing Superman M-shaped boots. You can really see still the sculpting is there. They clearly have just only painted over top of it in the white. Again, for what it is, it's not a bad-looking Superman. I feel there's, if anything, room for improvement. Maybe they could have used a different body, a different build. I would have really loved, if anything, they could have used the original Action Comics Superman. That first wave figure release of Superman that we would have gotten, I think would have lent well to this particular body. And I think using that one instead, you wouldn't have gotten as much of a shorter and squatter Supes. Now, for the figure's articulation, the head is going to be on a ball joint, so it does rotate all the way around. The head looks up fairly high, in fact, so if you did want to use yourself, say, a flight stand, you probably could easily have Superman in flight if you wanted to. Head does look down that low, and of course you can move it back and forth as well. Now, with the shoulders, the problem with the shoulders is the shoulder works fine on this side. You can easily rotate the arm all the way around. Brings the arms out as well at 90 degrees. There's also the swivel, all the hinges and the double hinges in the elbow, and all the stuff that goes along with it. So again, you got the rotation in the hand. This side, because of course the cape drapes out the way that it does, it flows out like a drape like this. It's a little harder, of course, then to rotate the arm because this cape now drapes over top of the top of his shoulders. So again, it looks like basically a blowing curtain. The arm does rotate only back and forth, but yeah, again, to rotate all the way around, you're going to get really tight in quarters with the rest of the cape that he has around it. You can still bring the arm out. There's no problems there. And all the swiveling and all the hinging that I talked about earlier is still present here on this arm. You just can't, again, rotate it all the way around just because of his cape. Upper torso is going to be on a ball joint. The lower torso is also on a ball joint. The legs do split out easily at 90 degrees. I mean, well, not quite 90 degrees, but I guess 90 if you were to look at the legs being straight. Yeah, 90 I guess would be that way, right? He has the ratchet joints once again on the insides of his thighs. Figure has a swivel. Biceps. Figure has a swivel at the top of his thigh. Figure has a double hinge on the knee, which is extremely tight in this figure, but again, I'd rather much have tighter joints in knees and elbows than super loose. And again, while he does have double hinges here, he also has a hinge in his ankle. So yes, you can move back and forth. You can also rock it back and forth this way. And the figure does also have toe articulation as well. So that's Superman. Some may say by looking then at Terry McGinnis, Superman may be the reasoning for wanting to get this set. I mean, you know, for Justice Lord's Superman, I feel like we did get ourselves an animated version of Justice Lord's Superman. I don't know. Did I do a review of that one? Now I'm just trying to think about that. But as it is for a Justice Lord's Superman, if I can actually get the figure to stand, I like this one, but it's definitely, I feel, using the wrong body. If you really love the Eradicator body or the Hush Superman body, why can't I get this guy on a, you know what, I'll grab the display stand just because the weight of the cape does give him some, again, some back heaviness. Getting him on a display stand because we're going to be talking a little bit more about Batman Beyond's Terry McGinnis. If you like the build of a Hush Superman, or you like the build, for example, of Eradicator, which essentially is just a mirror mold to this one, then you'll probably like this one. I still feel like the body is probably the wrong proportions if you want to get a really true menacing Justice Lord Superman. I personally would have preferred the Action Comics Supes as the mold, as basically the building blocks for giving us a Justice Lord Superman. As it is with this proportions, I feel again like he looks okay from like the waist up. Still a bit of a head, but like from the waist up, it's not so bad. It's like the lower half that sort of makes Superman a tad bit too squat. As for Batman Beyond Terry McGinnis, the figure comes included with swappable hands and also comes to include with some rather unique looking batarangs. First, the figure hands. Now, he has gripping hands right now. Ideally for holding the batarangs, although they don't hold it very well. The figure also comes included with dynamic or clawing hands. I always kind of look at these as kind of being more slashing hands. I think some of the Terry McGinnis's, in fact, I think all the Batman Beyond figures have at some point come included with these hands. If, though, in the meantime, though, you want to have the figure holding something, for example, well, the figure comes also included with these really interesting looking batarangs. Normally, batarangs for Batman Beyond would kind of be just like this, for example, but you get ones that actually have these extra little points down at the bottom, because again, he's an eviler Batman Beyond. I know that's not really a word, an eviler Batman Beyond Terry McGinnis. Maybe he also has a little bit more evil batarangs too. Now again, he has 2 of these. There's no real additional paint to them. They're only just the molded black plastic. You can take the figure as he is right now, and without dropping, of course, the batarangs, you just take them and you fit them in his hand. The problem with it, though, is see the way it forks at the bottom like this. It makes things then very difficult if you want to have them actually holding it, because like if not for that extra point, it would be a lot easier just to slide it into his hand. As it is right now, he is basically just barely holding onto it, and I've had these fall on the floor several times. Again, if you wanted to change out the hands to something a little bit more dynamic, just pop the hands off from the forearms and replace them then with the slashing hands. I know they're not really slashing hands, more dynamic hands. But yeah, if you want to swap those out, you just easily pop these off from the forearm pegs and then replace them out with the hands that you want to use instead. Now for this one, actually, Terry McGinnis is based on Batman Beyond 2.0. This particular comic run of Terry McGinnis with this particular suit, I think a lot of times it's mostly gray. Looking it up online, because I'm not as familiar necessarily with the comic run, I think a lot of images, in fact, of this version of Terry McGinnis does actually have all the things that you're seeing here in green, more a gray instead. It's not to say that it doesn't actually have a green sported at some point during the comic panels, but mostly from what I've seen at least, Terry McGinnis tends to have gray instead of the green. I'm not really sure why they opted to go with the green. In a way, though, kind of keeping more to the darker roots and the darker character of the character, I honestly would have gone instead with the gray instead. The face sculpt is something that one thing I really do like about this head sculpt. I'm bringing in the other Terry McGinnis, because one thing I did mention in his review, I believe, is I would have loved if they could have actually found a way to paint the teeth in or paint the mouth. This Terry McGinnis, ironically enough, not really being the true OG, does have the one thing that the original OG figure didn't have, is the fact that they actually did sculpt in an actual smiling face. I would love to see this figure get, I say love to get this guy released again, but I mean, how many Terry McGinnises have we already had now? 4 or 5? And then we also got ourselves Batwoman Beyond, a couple of variations of those as well. This version of Terry, I'm going to bring back in the original Terry McGinnis so you guys can see, like, it is literally just using the same mold, just with a brand new head sculpt. Again, I really like this head, and in a way I wish I could have swapped it around, but obviously then I'm going to have to cope with the idea that this one has the green. Not that I really want to start to change things around anyways on this figure. One thing, as I'm kind of just rubbing my finger across it, some of the ridges, for example, on the tops of his eyebrows seem a little bit more defined than the more slightly smoother ridges that the original Terry McGinnis or Batman Beyond would have had. The crest or symbol on the front is exactly in the same placement. And would you believe all the things that are painted in green wasn't really there initially in the initial sculpt. It's basically all things that they would have just painted over top of the existing body. So everything that's panel lined in green would have just only been painted over top of the existing mold. One thing that's very different, though, about this version of Batman Beyond is the fact instead of actually having the glider wings on the back, he has these really gnarly looking bat wings. These are overlapped one another, so like just to look at the original figure, see how one was kind of sitting on top of the other and they basically were pegged in place. You could then bring these out if you wanted to. And you could also then take, there's a little peg on the side of Terry's arm. If you could then just take his arm and attach it in place. Now, you would have to attach it. I did do much talking about this, obviously, in his own review. You attach it this way, but I honestly usually like to take this little blade and attach it this way, just because it looked a little bit more natural for him to attach the cape that way, or the gliders on the back that way. This version of Terry doesn't actually have a slot to where his arm attaches to it. Rather, instead, though, he has these, again, really interesting looking gargoyle wings. If you like the look of Terry McGinnis, I mean, obviously it's a little bit of a departure from what we're normally seeing with Terry, but it's really kind of interesting to actually see him with these weird looking wings instead of what we're so used to seeing normally. Of course, the rest of the body and the build is exactly the same. Things that normally would have been painted, unfortunately, now just get robbed of it and just basically is left behind with the black plastic. The original one would have had, again, the utility belt here painted in red with all the little side squares painted in silver. This one, unfortunately, just does away with that altogether in favor of just the black. So again, like, while it is just a remold of the earlier looked at Batman Beyond, at least they did do a little bit something different by adding the wings on the back. For the figure's articulation, it just, Can we do this? Oh, we'll leave them up. For the figure's articulation, Batman Beyond does have all the same things that the earlier Batman Beyond had. So again, he has the ball joint on the head, so you can rotate it all the way around. Head looks up about that high, and you can look it down that low. Also rock it back and forth as well. Now, the only thing, of course, having the wings out like this, it's going to make things a little bit difficult for me to rotate the arms all the way around. I guess one thing I also did want to say, too, about these gargoyle wings, I know it's supposed to really be more like bat wings. They're always really hard, I find, to kind of get them to fold back in. Because as you're bringing them down, they always feel like, I feel at least, they always keep wanting to hit one another. And then I have to kind of make sure I've got the right one over top of the other, that when I'm folding back in place. The only other thing, too, is while you're folding them down, I don't think they look as natural as the original Batman Beyond. I thought the way that the wings or the glider parts actually sat against the back of the figure's body looked a little bit more natural than what we're getting here. This sort of looks like the beginning of what would be a cape, but just doesn't continue on up here. So it kind of just looks like a weird little thing that sticks out the sides of his legs. But I guess with at least having it down like this, it allows me the chance to show you guys the articulation for the elbows or on the shoulders. The arms rotate all the way around. Once again, you can bring them out at 90 degrees. You can swivel at the bicep. Double hinge once again on the elbow, and again the hands rotate all the way around. The upper torso is on a ball joint. The lower torso is on a ball joint. The legs do split out, once again ratcheted joints. Forward and back on the legs, slight swivel at the top, double hinge on the knee, ankle articulation up and down this way, ankle rocker back and forth this way, and again you got your toe articulation as well. If really looking at the two figures, I feel honestly the real reason to get this set, unless you really like this look of Batman Beyond, I just feel like I've got so many Batman Beyond figures already in my collection that just by getting this one, it just screams to me like a variation or just a variant to the one that we've already gotten before. If anything, I could say as a praise to that one, because looking at my other Batman Beyonds just off to the side, we don't have, I think, any of them at all that have ever been released with the smiling face or the visible teeth. Again, here's the OG one, so I'm just going to put the OG right next to the new one that we got here in this set. Yeah, it's the only takeaway I would say from this one that I like the improvements made with at least the head sculpt that I feel, if anything, I really hope that McFarlane Toys could re-release this guy again. Not that we already have enough of these already, but releasing him again with at least the smile that he has on the front of his face. Other than that, I mean, like, for this set, I think the price of admission is more so Justice Lord Superman. I like the head sculpt for Justice Lord Superman. I just don't really like the body. And this body, again, works fine for a character like Bizarro, where you got a bigger, stockier build character. But I don't think it works necessarily as well for Superman. I had already mentioned the fact that this guy could have worked really well with a better body like Action Comics Superman. The other one I was also thinking about, how much better may it have looked if they had used the DC Rebirth Superman body. That one's a big, bulky Superman. And it also is a lot proportionally better. Like, I think it's got the longer legs, it's got the wider torsoed body. I think it probably would have worked a little bit better for the Justice Lord's Superman. That's just my own personal opinion. Other than that, though, it's a nice looking set. And again, if you want to get yourself some Justice Lord figures, I mean, Superman's a good one to start with. Hopefully, we might see other Justice League members in upcoming releases. While I may have started the review having the two characters going toe-to-toe with one another, I think it made a little bit more sense for the backstory of them to be kind of united on top of the plastic standee that comes included with these figures. One of my favorite things about the figures, at least with the 2-packs, is that Todd and his team include these extra little things that you can display them with. They don't always work, granted. If you have the pegs too close with one another, and that's been the case with some of the standees, then it's really hard to have the figures displayed because they feel like they're kind of butting in with one another. This stand actually at least has the pegs far enough away from one another. If you wanted to have them kind of united as I have it right now in final looks, or if you want to have them facing head to head with one another, there at least is enough space. I said in the review maybe they were a little too close together. They're actually a lot further away, as you probably can see. I've got both figures attached onto their pegs, and the figures look really good. The only thing that you will not be seeing right now, for obvious reasons, is the background. The background would just be completely blocking the figures right now. And let's face facts. Who really wants to really have their figures displayed? Not that I'm judging anybody really, but who really wants to have their figures displayed with the pictures of those characters behind them? I'm glad, at least when it comes to these backgrounds, that they include a double-sided feature. So one side, if you wanted to, could be the Batcave like that. I'm going to be displaying the figures. And then the other side, again, just strange to have images. I don't think Radioactive Man necessarily be walking around with Radioactive Man on his shirts. I remember that episode from The Simpsons. Nice overall figures. I'm not as necessarily wowed with Batman Beyond. I like the inclusion of the wings, because that's one thing that the original Batman Beyond didn't actually have. He had glider wings, yes, but these neat-looking bat wings that he has definitely adds a little bit of extra differencing to him, so he doesn't just look like we just took the initial figure and just repainted him a little bit different, which essentially is what they did, but they at least gave him a brand new head sculpt, which in a way I'm kind of jealous for the other Batman Beyond figures because they don't have those. The newer one definitely does things a little bit better with a brand new smiling face. And again, you've got the panel lining, which for obvious reasons is simply just painted over top of the existing body. I'm not going to fault them necessarily. I can't expect them to mold a brand new figure when, again, it's just going to be Batman Beyond anyways. My biggest issue really with this set is more of Justice Lord's Superman. I like the head sculpt. I like the hands, and I like the way they've sculpted the cape. I liked it really when we looked at the Eradicator the first time around. I think it actually works really well with this version of Superman as well. The biggest thing for me, at least, is the head. The head, first of all, is way too big, I feel, for the rest of the figure's body. The head probably should have been a little bit smaller than what it is, and always using this particular body. They always keep wanting to go back to using this body. I think the legs are always way too short in the figure. If they, for example, had mentioned, I did mention this in the review, had they used, for example, a DC Rebirth body, or had they used the original Action Comics Superman, I think proportionally they could have still used this head and those hands and giving us maybe a better Justice Lord's Superman. What do you guys think of this set? Let me know down below in the comments section. Is this one you guys could see yourselves picking up, or is this a total pass? Let me know down below in the comments section. Also, hey, as well, if you guys enjoyed this video, I want to hit it with a like. If you guys are loving the content you guys are seeing, and you certainly would like to stick around for more, if you haven't already done so, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below and turn on as well the bell notification. Turning on that bell notification will ensure that whenever new content is getting posted, you are always going to be getting those notifications from YouTube. And though while we have wrapped up things right now, at least for a 2-pack Justice Lord, Superman, and slightly corrupted Terry McGinnis, definitely going to be having a lot more DC Multiverse reviews coming your way. As always, guys, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.